Hi, Paula.
Hey.
Good afternoon, and welcome to our presentation on county distribution of coronavirus relief funds. Our presentation will start at 1 o'clock. We have a few more minutes, so we'll allow others to join. While we're waiting, and I'll be repeating this when we start, if you have any questions, your mics are mute. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the Q&A chat, and we will try to respond to all the questions being asked. If we don't have enough time or we don't know the answer, we will research those and provide our answers in the future, and we'll provide those to everyone who is on this presentation. We have 2 more minutes until 1 o'clock. We'll just continue to allow people to enter the meeting. We have 1 more minute before we will start the meeting. Okay, the clock has struck 1 and we're going to get started. I want to welcome you all to the county distribution of the coronavirus relief funds. My name is Barbara Baldwin. I am an Assistant State Budget Officer in the Office of Budget Management. I am also the Acting Director of the North Carolina Pandemic Recovery Office until we have hired a permanent director. With me today is Mary Evans. She was instrumental in calculating the allocations to each county and developing some unique documents that we will be discussing today. She will also be monitoring questions that will be asked during our presentation. Everybody's mic is muted. If you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A chat, and we will be monitoring that, as I said, and we will do our best to answer all your questions. If we run out of time or we do not know the answer, we will provide those answers in the near future through an email. Now on to our agenda. Today we're going to talk about the laws, a little bit about funding allocation methodology, the application process, guidance on the use of funds, and reporting requirements. The CARES Act was passed just a mere 6 weeks ago on March 27th. The Corona Relief Funds, or CRF funds, were allocated, and North Carolina received just over $4 billion. $480 million of that went directly to the counties of Guilford, Mecklenburg, and Wake, and also the city of Charlotte. So they will not be receiving any part of the $150 million that was allocated during the past session. The first treasurer's guidance was published April 23rd, and we'll discuss that a little later. The General Assembly quickly convened on April 28th and worked to appropriate these funds, where the governor signed the bill on May 4th, just 2 days ago. So today we're having a meeting to discuss those funds that were appropriated. $300 million was placed in a reserve for local governments. $150 million will be allocated as quick as possible to the 97 counties that did not receive a direct appropriation from the federal government. The other $150 million will be placed in a reserve and will be issued to counties only if the U.S. Treasury modifies its guidelines and allows the use of these funds for revenue replacement. Now we'll talk about funding allocation. We used a two-step method, and the map is a heat map that shows the amount of funds based on the color. The darker the color, the more funds you'll receive. You'll see the three big holes in the map. Those are the counties that received the direct appropriation. I love the map, but I know you're waiting to find out exactly how much money you received. So without ado, on the next slide, these are your amounts. And as I mentioned, this was a two-step process. Counties were allotted $250,000 as a base. The remaining funds were allocated to each county based on the 2019 county population. I'll give you a couple more seconds to locate your amount of funds. We also have updated the invitation that was sent out just moments before this meeting, and you do have this information in that updated invitation. Are there any questions at this point? No.
The only question is, when can counties expect to receive their funds? And we're going to get to that.
We are going to get to that. We are going to get to that. Right, we'll get started with that right now. So to receive your funds, we need you to complete a couple of forms. First, an application form. This was just recently sent to you in an updated invitation. There are only 6 questions. We tried to simplify this as much as possible. The first 3 questions relate to contact information, county name, the point of contact of the person who we can reach out to when we need information regarding these funds, their contact information, their title, your physical location, and your zip code. The zip code must be the 9-digit zip code, your 5 digits dash 4 more digits. We're requesting this because it's part of the FFATA Act, which I'm going to talk about now. The FFATA Act is the Federal Funding, Accountability, and Transparency Act. Most federal funds that are received are required to follow the FFATA Act. In meetings with U.S. Office of Management and Budget, we were told that we would have to follow the FFATA Act for these CARES funds. Therefore, that 9-digit zip code is required, and 2 other questions we're asking. One relating on the amount of federal funds being received by a county. You will respond yes or no to the question. The question is, does the county receive 80% or more of its gross revenues from federal funds? That could be federal contracts, subcontracts, loans, grants, subgrants, cooperative agreements. And does the county receive 25 million or more in annual gross income in federal monies? So if you meet both of those, you just respond yes or no. The second question has to do with executive compensation. The FFATA Act wants, part of it is transparency, and they want to ensure the public has knowledge of your compensation of your executive leadership. The question is, does the public have access to compensation of your leadership? If you publish your payroll somewhere where citizens can review it, that would be a yes. If you don't publish it anywhere and individual citizens do not have access, readily available access to that information, then you respond no. If you responded yes to the first question and no to the compensation question, we will be contacting you in the future for more information. That will allow us to complete the requirements of FFATA, which are, since we are the prime awardee, any funds that we grant out are sub-award, which are the counties. We have to go into the federal funding reporting system and put in each subrecipient, the county name, the amount of money, and if you don't have publicly available information related to your compensation, we would have to enter that. The other thing, I apologize, the other thing we are collecting is the DUNS number. We do need your DUNS number because when we put that into the federal system, it populates all your contact information. The last thing you will be doing for the application is signing it. And when you sign it, you're certifying that you will use the funds appropriately based on the laws, which we'll be covering next. You will submit a plan by June 1, and we'll be talking about that a little later in the presentation. You understand that these funds are subject to a clawback feature, that if the funds are mishandled or misused, the state will claw the funds back, including measures up to reducing or eliminating other state funds. That was actually in the session law, and you'll see that verbatim in the application. Next, you'll be certifying that you will be submitting reports to the Office of Pandemic Recovery. And we'll talk more about that later. And then finally, you're certifying any unspent funds as of December 30, 2020 by the county or any of the county subrecipients will be returned to the state. Then the other form is the W-9. It's a standard document that our office needs that will allow us to cut a check to provide you with 100% of the funds allotted. We are advancing all the funds up front. We have sent you these documents. I do want you to understand, if you go back right now and fill those out and email them to us, we cannot give you the funds today. Our office is working diligently with the state treasurer and the state controller to set up budget codes, certify those budget codes that will allow us access to the money. Once we have access to the money and you return these two forms, we will be issuing your money to you. Do we have any questions in the chat?
We have a couple of questions. So someone's asked, is the substitute W-9 form that was included in the updated meeting invite the application form? The answer to that is no. So you're going to fill out the application form, which is a DocuSign link that I included in the event invite. And then you'll also have to fill out the W-9 because that is what the business office will use to give you your funds. The discussion of sub-allocation to cities, that's coming in a little bit, so just hold on. We are going to put a copy of this presentation because it's being filmed or recorded on the OSVM/NC Pro website. And for the question regarding the School of Government salary survey counting as advertising our salaries, TBD.
Yeah, we will research that, but I think that will depend on if that's readily available to the public. But we will get back to you on that one. Thank you for the questions. Now we're going to move on to the use of funds. Next slide, please. The CARES Act only had 3 requirements for the use of funds. Of course, the first requirement was they have to be necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency related to the coronavirus. We're going to talk a little more in depth about this in a minute. The second requirement is the funds were not accounted for in the most recent approved budget as of March 27th. So if your county board met in January as a preemptive strike and allocated $1,000 for PPE, you have to spend your county money, $1,000 for PPE, and then any funds over that amount, you should use the Corona relief funds. That's one example. And the final is any expense that occurred from March 1, 2020 through December 30, 2020 is an allowable expense, as long as it meets the other 2 requirements. So guidance on the use of funds. As I mentioned earlier, around April 23rd, the treasurer provided guidance on how to use the funds. The treasurer discussed 6 buckets, and I'm going to talk about those 6 buckets. The first bucket was medical expenses. You can utilize your funds for any medical expenses such as testing, emergency response or transportation, cost to establish or operate telemedicine, and increasing capacity in hospitals, clinics, or other similar facilities. The second area is public health expenses. Some examples of public health expenses are communicating and enforcing public health orders, acquisition and distribution of PPE and medical supplies, disinfecting public areas, public safety measures that are taken, and the cost to quarantine individuals. So if you've closed off parks and you had to buy gates or locks to close those parks off, that would be an allowable expenditure. The fourth area is action to facilitate public measures. These include food delivery to senior citizens and other vulnerable populations, improving teleworking for public employees, facilitating distance learning and improving technology related to distance learning, sick pay, family, medical pay, medical leave pay to public employees, the cost to enforce social distancing in county jails or sanitizing your county jails, and also any funds spent for care of the homeless population. The next area is expenses associated with economic support. This is not revenue replacement. If you get anything out of this presentation, remember, you cannot use these funds for revenue replacement. You cannot use them to replace taxes that are decreasing, but you can use them to grant funds to small businesses. You can use them for payroll support programs or unemployment insurance costs. And then, of course, the treasurer gives you the last bucket, any other related expenses. There's not a definition to this, and I don't have any examples. The next slide, we're going to talk a little more about some general federal guidance. You cannot double dip. So if you used some funds to pay, some FEMA funds to pay for some PPE, you cannot then turn that expense in for these CRF funds. That's not allowed. Or if you're if you have insurance and they paid off on something, you cannot then utilize these funds for that same thing. There's no double dipping. And here again, you cannot replace government revenue funds that are lost. If you had to close attractions you charged fees for and your fees are down, you cannot use these funds to replace those fee losses or tax losses. And then finally, remember, all funds have to be spent by December 30. If they're not spent, you have to return them. At this point, that's what the law says. There is no guidance that says you can have these encumbered like your typical funds and have 90 days to close out. Nowhere in the CARES Act or the guidance does it say this. So at this point, the funds must be spent. If the treasurer updates any guidance, NC Pro will be providing that information on their website, and we will be communicating that to all recipients of these funds. Are there any questions on the use of funds?
One person asked about the park reservation refunds, but I think we already answered that. That would be a no.
That would be a no.
And then, does the county pay plan count as advertising, or do we need to have a separate document with actual salaries posted, and does that include the commissioner's salaries?
I can't answer that right now, but we will contact you to get more information specifically what you mean. Mary, if you can identify that individual county, and we'll reach out to them.
They're currently anonymous, so if you guys can send an email to ncpro@osbm.nc.gov, we will be happy to help.
Yes, we will. And that email will be provided at the end of this presentation. Okay, the next slide we're going to talk about reporting requirements. Oh, excuse me, I missed a slide. We do have some state guidance. We have developed some state guidance. We've provided you with a funding priority. It's a list of all funds available to local governments, and we rank them in the order that we feel they should be used. And you'll see the CRF monies are first. And that's because the CRF funds are short-lived. You have from March until December to spend them, which is a rather short time for a disaster recovery fund. And then also, there are no matches with these dollars. So we are providing guidance that you use these dollars first. Next, we have already received questions over the last few days. Is OSBM gonna, or is whether OSBM or the pandemic office, are they going to provide guidance on how to allocate these funds to municipalities? Unfortunately, no. We will not be providing guidance on how you should allocate these funds to municipalities. And that is because counties vary in the way they provide services, in the way they share their tax base. Therefore, we feel it would not be sufficient for us to provide a one model fits all distribution allocation, because some municipalities provide their own EMS services, where other municipalities outsource this to the counties. Therefore, we just don't feel it would be appropriate for us to try to figure out a one size fits all. And next, the pandemic office will be updating guidance throughout the next 12 months. There will be a website developed where you can go and monitor guidance. And currently we do have an email which will be provided on the last page for you where you can contact us.
Hey, Barbara, we're getting a lot of questions.
Okay, let's go to the questions.
Okay. The first overwhelming question is the payroll expenses under the Federal Treasury guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
People would like to know more.
So when it comes to payroll for your public employees, I'm assuming that's what we're talking about. You can utilize your funds to cover the cost of payroll if your employees are substantially deployed to address the pandemic issues. That means most of their time is not doing their normal duties, but they're addressing pandemic issues. I would say, like myself, all my time right now is spent on establishing the new pandemic recovery office. I have no plans to substitute CRF monies for my salary, but that would be one example. Also, if you had to furlough employees and then you're bringing them, if you're bringing them back to do pandemic work such as tracing or other things, you can use CRF monies for their payroll expenses, including benefits. I hope that covered that question.
Another question related to payroll is, can money be used to pay overtime to employees, including those that are deemed both essential and non-essential? Can it pay for additional work hours for FLSA exempt employees also?
I would like to do a little research on that. I want to say yes, but I'm not going to say yes until I do a little more research, and we are going to stand up a web page and we will publish that on the web page, and we will also email that response to everyone who's been invited to this meeting.
Another question related to payroll, can funds be used for hazard pay?
Yes. And that is, when you say hazard pay, that's the requirement of paying time and a half or time and a quarter. My understanding is yes. But all of these questions you're asking, I will be putting a document together so you will have all the answers in writing. And we will post them on that web page.
Another question. So they want to know if we can support adjusted operational practices to maintain, they can use the funds to support adjusted operational practices to maintain a 6-foot separation or provide a physical barrier, such as paying for the installation of tempered glass. They also purchase technology or technology infrastructure to help enable provision of mandated services while enabling recommended safety practices. Purchase trailers that can serve as a warehouse or distribution center for storage of PPE, or temporary structures that will also serve as these purposes.
Yes, you can purchase trailers to house items. You need to follow the disposal rules of assets when you're done. You can, what was the other areas?
The technology and
the
physical barriers.
The plastic dividers to keep the 6-foot separation would be an allowable expense. Any of the requirements to meet the CDC social distancing requirements would be allowed.
And then another question is, what about providing funding to nonprofits that serve homeless, hungry, mental health, or other impacted groups?
You can grant your funds to municipalities or nonprofits. You will be responsible for their use of those funds, ensuring they follow all the requirements.
This other question, waiving utility late fees and reconnecting counts as lost revenue.
You cannot utilize these funds to supplement lost revenues of any kind. Whether you're waiving late fees, interest, you cannot supplement these funds for those losses.
What about adding EMS staffing to handle COVID calls?
That is allowable.
And as far as accessing the application, there's a link in your event that has been emailed to you. And If you can't find the link, then I can help you and we can send it to you. But I think we're good to go on to the next slide at this point.
Okay. The next slide is on reporting requirements. We have the plan that when you filled out your application, you certified that you would submit a plan by June 1. As I said, the NC Pro will provide you with the form to complete your plan. And the reporting will be in 6 broad categories, and then there'll be a 7th sub-grant category. So there'll really be 7 areas you could spend your money in. 6 in the areas we talked about earlier. The last area is if you're going to grant funds out to municipalities or nonprofits. If you do grant funds out, we want to know who is receiving those funds and how much funds do you plan to grant out. And then the reporting requirements for the use of funds. The counties will report on the use of the municipalities or nonprofits that you grant the funds to. Reports are due October 1, 2020, and then January 1st, 2021. Information that will be provided, and here again, NC Pro will provide you a form to complete that information. And you'll have to provide information in October and January on the use of funds. What did you spend the money on? How much money did you spend on that? And then how much money remains? That ends the presentation. As I said, the final slide shows the NC Pro email address. You can submit your forms to this address. You can submit questions to this address. Currently, myself and 4 other OSBM employees are monitoring this email address, and we will be responding to your inquiries or questions until we have permanent staff or time-limited staff set up in the NC Pro office. And I'm going to ask again, are there any other questions that we can provide answers to at this time?
Barbara, we got 2.
Okay.
So far. If a county shares with a city, is the county responsible for ensuring the city doesn't misuse the funds? If the city does misuse the funds, is the county liable to the state?
Yes and yes. However, the law says the municipality could be liable also. But we are allocating these funds to the county, and if the county so chooses to subgrant those funds out, they will be held responsible for those. We expect you to monitor your subgrantees just like any other type of grant you would receive.
Next question is, does food delivery to seniors include adding at-risk individuals to Meals on Wheels if the county is out of Meals on Wheels slots? Yes.
Yes.
Will OSBM approve the county's plan before releasing the funds? Will the release be the full allocation upfront or on a reimbursement basis?
We will be releasing the funds, 100% of your funds prior to receiving your plan. We have a lot of logistics behind the scenes of setting up budget codes, working with the controller's office to get those set up, working with the treasurer's office to move the funds into those accounts. Once we receive your application and your W-9, we will issue you the funds. 100%.
Because of the short time period to develop the plan, can it be modified after June 1?
Yes, it can. Plans are plans and they can always be modified.
Our board established a COVID budget before March 27th. However, the funds were encumbered, not spent. Can the funds spent later be CARES eligible?
No. Remember that, like we said, the one CARES Act requirement, 1 out of 3, was that budget requirement. And if you budgeted funds for responding or recovering from coronavirus, you have to utilize those funds CARES money or Corona relief funds cannot be supplemented. Or I should say supplanted into your budget.
Is the application form available other than in the signature restricted link? Yes, we can send you a PDF of the application form. We were just trying to make it easy for everyone who might not be able to sign and PDF it back to us. So if you would like a regular PDF of the application form, email the NC Pro email and we can send that out to you. Will we have an FAQ to capture the answers we've reviewed today?
Yes. We will put together an FAQ and post it on our webpage once we get that established, which we're hoping to do in the next few days.
Can the funds be used to pay for the emergency paid sick leave and emergency FMLA?
Yes. For public employees.
Can we hire, or can we use this money to hire a grant coordinator?
Only if that grant coordinator is 100% fully focused on coronavirus work.
And that kind of goes with a salary for new staff responsible for monitoring sub-grants and allowable expense.
Only if 100% of that person's time is spent on that function related to the COVID virus.
Is there any criteria for small business grants?
No, we have not created any criteria for small business grants.
Can the expenses for monitoring the funds be included?
I'm sorry, Mary, you broke up a little bit there.
Can the expenses for monitoring the funds be included?
If they're payroll, if it's current employees on payroll, only if they're substantially addressing the coronavirus.
Okay, that's already. What would be considered primarily deployed for COVID-19 activities from a payroll perspective? Is this 60%, 75%, 90%?
That's a very good question because we've asked that same question of the U.S. Treasurer and we have not received a response back on that. They basically say we can define that and we haven't defined that yet. So we do not have an answer on that one, but we will try to get back to you on defining that. What we have right now is substantial amount of time. I know that's not very useful for you folks, but that's what we have. And we haven't really sat down and discussed a lot of these guidance because we've been trying to put these documents together so we can allocate these funds to you quickly.
Will posting of senior county management staff salaries in the newspaper each year meet the requirement?
I will have to check into that one. I'm not sure.
And
we'll get
then
back to you on that.
Our last question, don't understand non-supplement prohibition. Salaries are already budgeted in annual budget and can be funded through CRF, but other line items in budget cannot be.
So you can't use these funds to supplant budgeted items that were budgeted prior to March 27. So let's say in February, your county commissioners met and passed a budget and said, we're going to give you one grants person just to handle all the money coming in to utilize to respond to the coronavirus. You cannot now use CRF funds for that grant position because your board already appropriated money for that position and for that specific purpose. So you can't any budget that was created prior where they were specifically addressing a coronavirus response or recovery items, you can't use these funds to supplant that. I hope that makes more sense to you folks. And if not, just please email the NC Pro and we'll provide additional guidance if that's not clear enough for you.
I think that's it. Unless anyone else has any other questions that they're, typing in.
Okay. And I will say, while you type your questions in, I should have told you this is a live broadcast. We are taping it, and we will be putting this webcast on our website for playback on demand.
Any more questions? Last call?
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I want to thank you all for attending our meeting. You should have those documents in the updated link that you can start filling out and returning to the NC Pro address. If you have any questions, please reach out to us at that NC Pro address, and we will respond to you as quick as possible. We appreciate you attending our meeting, and have a very good day.